In this video, I want to briefly touch on several areas of international water cooperation. We touched on water in an earlier week, and one of the major puzzles in that week was the fact that water is a scarce resource in a number of different parts of the world, and we've seen in the theoretical models over the course of the term that scarcity usually increases the risk of conflict. However, water is one of those areas in which cooperative efforts have actually outnumbered conflictual efforts. And so we've seen how water could be a potential source of conflict both subnationally within countries and across boundaries, fuzzy or otherwise. However, a lot of the literature suggests that it's more frequently a source of cooperation, even between countries that have gone to war over other issues like Pakistan and India. And so there's a number of different efforts. I included readings from that previous week by Gleditsch and others that started to try to gather databases on river boundaries or rivers to see whether they're a source of disputes. There's there's that one database of water disputes that goes back 4,000 years. Here's another one in case you're interested, and to look at different measures of the same underlying phenomenon. We've tried to do that as much as possible in this class, but just look at the number of different river basins that can cross borders. Most areas, most transnational river crossings affect like 3 countries, maybe 4, but you have the Danube in Europe crossing the boundaries of 17 countries, which connects to the discussion earlier about how the larger number of actors can provide higher stakes or making it harder to cooperate. The Nile would be another example that we've seen so far in this term, but there is huge river systems in the major geographical regions. I mean, Australia, of course, is an exception here that can provide incentives for cooperation or conflict. I think this database is interesting in that it kind of codes not just disputes but also cooperative overtures, from verbal support for cooperation to verbal hostility. Most of the events here are what the states are actually saying, not actually reaching concrete agreements or potentially mobilizing conflict. But there's no from 1946 to 1999, no formal wars over water have occurred according to this database. There's been military acts or hostile acts that are still more scarce than international agreements, but you see that lower level conflict would be considered, including things related to water quality, dams. We've seen the difficulties that Egypt has had with upstream states putting dams on the Nile. Water quantity we've touched on with the Central Asian example, how Kyrgyzstan and its downstream neighbors had disagreements about when water should be released and how much. And there's also similar kind of areas for cooperation relating to water quality, to infrastructure, water quantity. The similar kind of issues can be both a potential source for conflict as well as a source for cooperation. So this is just a brief another source that I thought I would highlight that references the connections to the sources of violence as well as the potential for the source for cooperation. And so I'm interested to see why you think that cooperation is more common than conflict over shared water resources. And the fact that most of these water disputes or water cooperative agreements are about fresh water. Be interested to see, to also connect it to the Arctic example later on, whether saltwater resources would also be something that would be considered as relevant, or whether saltwater is considered as something distinct by itself, or whether it's what's in the water, whether it be resources, fishing, or other things that could lead differences between saltwater and freshwater resources as a potential source for cooperation or conflict. So please, if you're interested in doing so, feel free to leave responses to that. I look forward to reading your responses. Now let's turn to the Arctic. I have several background videos that I would encourage you to watch in the playlist related to the Arctic. Here in Australia, We are very far away from the Arctic, and so it might not be an area that you've potentially thought that much about, but I think it is a crucially important source for strategic, economic, and political interest by the major powers, both within the last 20 years and potentially going forward in the future. And one of the main reasons why is the first video from, I believe it's from NASA, showing the declining sea ice levels in the Arctic over the last 30 years or so. It really is really hard for me to comprehend the huge shift in the extent and the durability and the thickness of the sea ice in the Arctic. It really, it scares me, and it is one of the most visible climate impacts of human behavior that I think we'll see over the entire course of this semester. So that there's the background video on that. There are two shorter videos about governments' responses to the kind of opportunities and challenges of the Arctic from CNN, one on a nuclear submarine, the other one on a Russian base. You can see these media efforts as ways for governments to show their own citizens as well as their rivals why they care about the region and what they're willing to do to be able to protect their interests there. And then the longer Al Jazeera Fault Lines documentary, I think it's like 25 minutes, I would encourage you to watch, and there'll be a question about it at the end of the next video that shows the different perspectives and the different actors from militaries to international natural resource corporations to the traditional owners of the land, how all of them are trying to adapt to these changing circumstances, to try to seek their own advantage, and to try to purvey interest in preserving what they consider to be their rights and interests in the area. So take a look at those now, and in the next video I'll spend a bit of time connecting it and the international efforts related to the Arctic. So let's go ahead and turn to that now.